Oh, I'll be goddamned if I let Michael Bay get ahead of me again. I've reviewed every one of his shitty movies, from Bad Boys to Transformers 3, and I was about to review the rest of them when MTV.com had to go and ask him the inevitable, "How do you deal with all them haters?" question. Quote, "They love to hate, and I don't care. Let them hate. They're still going to see the movie. I think it's good to get a little tension." Unquote. Well then, with our director's permission, it seems Bay's worked out a little deal with his corporate masters at Paramount. Keep cranking out Transformers films, in exchange for time off in between to make smaller pictures about really real shit. As long as said shit involves manly men doing manly things in beautiful environments. Pain and Gain told the story of steroidal criminals in Bay's fair adopted city of Miami, Florida. 13 Hours tells the story of CIA contractors in Libya, played here by Malta, which is basically Europe's Florida. Pain and Gain memorably opened with a voiceover from Ed Harris, telling us that unfortunately, this is a true story. 13 Hours omits the unfortunately, which is itself unfortunate. If any true story deserved to have an unfortunately tacked onto it, it's this one. First of all, what we now call Libya didn't even exist until 1951. Before that, there were at least 3 distinct regions within its modern borders. Tripolitania, in the northwest, with its capital of Tripoli. Fezzan, in the southwest, with no real capital, since that's where the desert begins. And Cyrenaica, in the east, with its historic capital, Benghazi. But even those are largely geographic fictions, dreamed up by bureaucrats in the Ottoman Empire sometime in the 16th century. If there's one thing that unites all the various peoples of modern Libya, it's a long, long, long history of being invaded by every jumped-up little empire in the neighborhood. From the Phoenicians to the Romans to the Ottomans to the Romans again, in the form of fascist Italy. Hell, even America took itself a turn in 1801. That's why the Marines all sing about the shores of Tripoli. Our ever-victorious Navy really never got much past the harbor. A Marine lieutenant, and an Army captain who liked to call himself general, a lot of those sprung up about 20 years after the revolution concluded and most of the actual generals had started to die, led a band of 500 mercenaries out of Alexandria, Egypt, across the desert, into the city of Derna, which is right down the road from Benghazi. Like any Mediterranean port worth a damn, Benghazi was already an international trading hub centuries, if not millennia, before the Ottomans made it a provincial capital. Because it was an international trading hub and provincial capital, Muhammad ibn Ali as-Sanusi, the Grand Sanusi, founder of the Sufi order that bears his name and still holds sway over at least a third of Libya's population, fled there in 1843 after Wahhabists forced him out of Mecca. Because the Grand Sanusi fled there, his grandson, Idris, could become King Idris I of Libya in 1951, and be overthrown in 1969 by the military coup led by one Muammar al-Gaddafi. For the next 40 years, Gaddafi ruled the country pretty much like the absolute monarch he deposed. Oh, but he didn't want to be called king, oh no. And he stopped calling himself prime minister after the 70s. He liked to style himself as the guide of his nation. A kindly, avuncular father figure who just so happened to have a secret police that could make you disappear if you talked too much shit. A country's worth of oil money can buy a lot of snitching. But on the other hand, it can also buy you higher education for the entire country's population. And if you got good grades, you could always get your doctorate at some Western university with an international student quota. That would at least get you out of the country. And, more importantly, give you the opportunity to make some friends. Who knows? Maybe friends of your friends will eventually get into government, and then they can hook you up with the President of France and the U.S. Secretary of State. Then you can spin all kinds of tall tales to those two, about how glorious it'll be once you overthrow Gaddafi. With a little help from their air forces, of course. This time, the revolution will be not just televised, but updated in real time on the Twitters and everything. And it'll be open and inclusive and democratic and freedom and all those other buzzwords everyone likes so much. Instant democracy. Just add 90 days of NATO bombing. It's a recipe that worked out so well in Iraq, we had to try it in North Africa. Especially after protests against Gaddafi's rule broke out in February 2011 in the city of Benghazi. No matter how far back in history you go, the city is there, waiting for you, like an arrow pointing towards the future. Seems obvious in hindsight, but then again so does everything. I mention all of this because I had to look it all up for my damn self. I certainly didn't get any of it from watching this movie or listening to the news. All we heard, if we watched TV in the lead up to the bombing, was, isn't it wonderful that women are finally getting the opportunity to leave a Middle Eastern country full of hot brass? Well, number one, Libya's in Africa. Middle East is a little, east of them. Yeah. And number two, yes, I'm sure Mary Wollstonecraft wrote that down in one of her dream diaries somewhere. There was a brief moment of ding-dong, the dictator's dead, after Gaddafi got sodomized with bayonets. But by October 2011, everyone in my country had gone back to pretending Libya didn't even exist. The hype train on 2012's presidential campaign was already coaled up and pulling out of the station. Our glorious Fourth Estate already obsessed with its every chug and whistle. So in one of the many unstable Salafist militias we allied ourselves with during the anti-Gaddafi uprising, turned around and attacked our diplomatic outpost in Benghazi and the CIA annex just down the road from it, it really did take everyone by surprise. A substantial chunk of my fellow Americans don't want to believe this, and I understand why. We live in a world where it's much safer to assume that government officials are lying to us whenever they open their mouths. The problem is, that skepticism's selective as all hell. Whenever any of them do open their mouths, at least a quarter of my country will go, no, seriously, for real, this time, not bullshit. And another quarter will go, bullshit, and fuck all the bullshitting liars who say so, leaving the rest of us to work things out for ourselves with a box full of half-broken tools. It's much easier to go through life believing that our government is run by malicious Manchurian candidates, out to steal everyone's guns before they impose Sharia law and herd us all into FEMA concentration camps. Oh yes, I remember George W.'s administration, which considered Gaddafi such a great ally in the war on terror, it sent Condi Rice over to make friends and influence people. Believe me, I know how it is. Believing that lets you believe yourself to be the brave lone warrior for truth, with a capital T, who might one day meet his trinity and learn kung fu without having to exercise. The idea that our leaders might just be short-sighted serial fuck-ups, who've nevertheless managed to climb to the heights of power anyway, that's just too scary a thought to entertain. Might undermine the fundamental myth of American meritocracy, and we certainly can't have that. I mean, after all, what is this, Russia? No, you can still see light through the differences. For one thing, we Americans still have delusions about social mobility, and a seeming obsession with turning every historical tragedy into a movie as quickly as possible, before the events plunge into our society's memory hole. Russian filmmakers are still mining Stalingrad for all it's fucking worth. But here we are, just 4 years after the fact, with what's universally become known as the Benghazi movie. Its true name is 13 Hours, The Secret Soldiers of Benghazi, based on the book 13 Hours, the inside account of what really happened at Benghazi. At least someone at this project knew enough to know they should probably change the subtitle and drop all pretense of telling us what really happened. The title card doesn't even have a subtitle on it, which makes me think the whole Secret Soldiers of Benghazi thing was an 11th hour edition, cooked up by the marketing department specifically so that anyone who glanced at the poster in a movie theater hall might know what they were getting. Either way, I take that as license to treat this like any other story and critique it as such. Treating it like the documentary, or docudrama, to use a completely bastardized phrase, that the right-wing media turned it into, would require me to ask too many annoying questions. Questions like, was the CIA using Ambassador Stevens, or was he using them? or both. Stephen seemed sincere in his desire to stick around and finish the job the bombing campaign began. So, of course, the film portrays him as an aloof, out-of-touch twit, surrounded by a compound full of other twits, ineffectual bodyguards, and stupid yes-men. And what was the CIA even doing in Libya in the first place? The movie hand-waves it away with a title card and a throwaway line about how they're buying up all of Gaddafi's surplus arms in order to keep them off the global black market. Right. And I'm sure all of those armaments were summarily destroyed, tossed into one of those molten pits from the end of Terminator 2, and not a single blessed one of them made its way to Syria, or Iraq, or Pakistan, or God knows where else. But there I go again, getting all political. In the lead-up to this thing's release, our director went out of his way to assure everyone that this movie about CIA contractors in a war zone that our country helped create and then did nothing to help fix, was, and I quote, not political. Typical boilerplate PR bullshit for any explicitly political film. And most of my colleagues repeated this line, uncritically, in a flagrant dereliction of duty. Not as flagrant as when we all let Zero Dark 30 scoot by without once questioning whether it was naked CIA propaganda. But still, a good chunk of y'all have been calling superhero movies fascist for almost a decade now, so I'm not surprised to see you let an actually fascist movie squeak by you with nary a peep. Maybe, instead of sucking air through your teeth every time you see somebody in a skin-tight leather outfit with a symbol on their chest, you could have tried reading up on the subject of your critiques. Then you might be able to recognize some of the hallmarks, especially when they're shaking their moneymakers right in your face. Susan Sontag would have a stroke if she was still alive enough to watch this shit. I quote now from her piece, Fascinating Fascism, a 1975 review of one of Leni Riefenstahl's photography books. Quote, "The fascist dramaturgy centers on the orgiastic transactions between mighty forces and their puppets, uniformly garbed and shown in ever-swelling numbers. Its choreography alternates between ceaseless motion and a congealed, static, virile posing. Fascist art glorifies surrender. It exalts mindlessness. It glamorizes death." Unquote. 4 Americans died on the night of September 11th, 2012, but here the glamour's reserved for the deaths of the 2 contractors from Global Response Staff, which, if you didn't know, is the CIA's own little private mercenary company. They formed it after 9/11, and they keep using it because if they just straight up hired ex-SEALs, Rangers, and Marines off the street, they'd have to pay for everyone's life insurance, and put everyone's kids through college. This is the CIA's brilliant idea for 21st century warfare. Let gormless white people wander around the Middle East and North Africa surrounded by the most conspicuous bodyguards since Usagi Yojimbo. Just let them grow beards and wear sunglasses. That's enough of a cover, right? This is why so many in our spy agencies are getting real nostalgic for the Cold War, and would like nothing better than to start a new one with Russia as soon as possible. That way, they can get all their human intel by letting gormless white people wander around Eastern Europe, where they blend right in, just like back in the day. To the movie's credit, it does have lead operator Tyrone Roan Woods point out the absurdity of all of this early on, but only so his CIA station chief can tell him to shut the fuck up and do as he's told. To watch 13 Hours is to watch egomania juxtaposed with impotent servitude. An obsession with failure, and stoically enduring the pain that failure inevitably brings. And a stab in the back by an incompetent civilian government, hampering the efforts of our society's brave and virtuous warrior elite, who could, of course, easily sort all of this shit out if we just let them slaughter everyone indiscriminately the way we train them to do. People are masked and turned into things. But since they're Libyans, we're not supposed to notice. We're supposed to be distracted by all of this grade A certified all-American beefcake. So distracted, in fact, that we fail to notice even our designated heroes becoming things. Bearded objects of pathos that half of our political culture dangles in front of the masses, encouraging them to the worst kind of self-destructive stupidity. Like, say, for example, paying money to see this movie. The first half follows point-of-view character Jack Silva as he arrives in-country and meets and greets the rest of our heroes, including Roan, his old friend who's gotten him back into contract work. They'll all be obscured by the fog of war later on, so latch on to their one-note character traits while you can, kids. Me, I latched on to Boone, because he and I have the same taste in light afternoon reading. Though out of all the sentences Joseph Campbell wrote during life, this movie had to pull one that sounds the most like it came from a self-help book. All the gods, all the heavens, all the hells are within you. Fair enough, but the problem is, both sides in our current forever war pray to the same bloodthirsty Bronze Age god. God of desert roads and burning cities, who disdained burnt offerings in favor of your favorite child. Oh no, wait, just kidding. Lol. You were actually about to go through with it, weren't you? Sucker. In this, he was the first and remains the greatest of trolls. I think it's safe to say he's either sitting this motherfucker out or actively encouraging further bloodshed. Jack also meets and greets our, I don't want to call the civilian CIA workers at his annex antagonists, but they are certainly idiotic fuckwits who'd be completely lost without their virtuous bodyguards. The first half hour of 13 Hours exists to underline this point and still manages to make room for a car chase. Can't let the car chase later go unforeshadowed, now can we? I mean, we're not dealing with complete amateurs here. We're rocking with Michael Bay, bitch! So Jack is an ex-SEAL with 2 daughters at home, forced back into contracting work by economic necessity. He got into the real estate market after the 2008 crash, as explained in another blink-and-you'll-miss-it line. There's a whole other movie in there about how modern mercenaries are made, and about how certain forces within our society would like to make more of them. But instead, this is the Benghazi movie. Man's got to have his priorities. Well, this place sucks, Jack, Roan says, summing up Libya in stereotypical American fashion. Quote, not only is it hot as balls, but you can't tell the good guys from the bad guys. Yes, totally unlike America, where summers keep getting colder every year, and all the bad guys wander around with villain printed on their t-shirts in block capitals. Oh, Jesus Christ, that thing's real? Fuck me. I swear I just made that up. My country is insane, you guys. We went crazy on September 11th, 2001, and we haven't gotten any better since. At this point, all the species of crazy have crossbred and mutated to the point where they're barely even recognizable anymore. That's how a movie like this can pass for not political, despite containing every talking point in the right-wing Benghazi lexicon. The first half hour is all about the mission's doomed stupidity. We even get a nice tour of the diplomatic compound, so we can see it before it gets all fucked up. And see how easily fuck-upable it was from the start. The last hour and a half are devoted to those titular 13. The attacks in this film are depicted as pre-planned, with at least some level of obvious local support. And this is the problem with trying to tell the true story of what really happened that night. Even basic facts like that have become points of political contention. Our heroes receive the legendary and probably mythical stand-down order from their chief. And this fucking guy. I think they call him Bob once or twice in dialogue, but for most of the movie, he's just the chief, making him the apotheosis of every weaselly dingus who's ever occupied a position of authority in the Michael Bay canon. From Chief of Police Joey Pants in Bad Boys, to 2 out of 3 of the Secretaries of Defense in the Transformers movies. No matter his form, the chief in a Michael Bay film exists to stymie and frustrate our heroes with bullshit technicalities. Because that's how you create drama. Apparently. One of our heroes sums him up by saying he gets his jollies pushing around alphas because he can. But who's more alpha? The alphas who meekly acquiesce to their beta boss? Or the beta boss who gets to boss around a whole team of alphas? because he learned how to play the game, while the rest of y'all were wasting your time on Call of Duty. Speaking of which, is that Advanced Warfare? Yeah, dude's playing Instinct and everything. But AW didn't come out until 2 years after the events this movie dramatizes. A little bit later, Sean Smith, the IT guy, who also died with Ambassador Stevens that night, is going to be playing Ghosts, which was still a year away from dropping. Man, movies are fucking bullshit. There is one throwaway line about how the Chief saw some shit back in the day, but we never really find out when his day was, or what shit he may or may not have saw. Then again, you could say the same about all of our heroes. Roan, for instance, is a native son of my own adopted city, Portland, Oregon. Oregon City High, class of '89, baby. A fact I should not have had to look up after watching a movie supposedly dedicated to him. The other glamorized casualty of that night, Glenn Doherty, was, no shit, one of the snipers who helped rescue Captain Phillips. But since that movie version of a horrible human tragedy was made by Sony, and this is a Paramount picture, your intercontinuity nerd shouldn't expect any crossovers. But that's the big lie about 13 Hours. The clue is in the title. It's much more interested in the events of that night than it is in any of the men who lived through it. Or didn't. The deaths of Ambassador Stevens and Sean Smith occur off-screen. Because they're civilians? Or is it because they're bureaucrats, and the civilian bureaucracy is the true villain of this piece? I mean, hell, Ansar al-Sharia might as well be a bunch of fucking zombies for all the personality they're given. Say what you want about 90s action movies. At least back then, your generic Islamic terrorists got to make a decent bad guy speech. Shit, if you're desperate, you could just copy-paste the one from True Lies. Does still fit. And it's not like anyone's paying attention, except for dicks like me. The very same bureaucracy abandons our heroes for the duration of the night, as its gears grind slowly and ineffectually. Jurisdictional arguments that are panned past as quickly as possible, so we can get back to what really matters. A predator drone watches everything from on high. A mighty force transacting with its puppets. That camera's lidless, unblinking eye is the only support our heroes enjoy. Until, of course, a fellow GRS contractor takes matters into his own hands like the manly man he is, forms a team, and rolls through the streets to relieve our heroes around 6 in the morning of September 12th. Before that's where the action comes in. But of course it's Bay in action, and by now you should know what to expect from that. It'll be shot too close and cut too quick in a way pretty much designed to annihilate any notion of coherent cinematic storytelling. A few shots are even explicitly designed to mimic the aim-down sights view you get from any big-budget first-person shooter video game, like, say, Call of Duty. And they're designed that way for exactly the same reason. To help immerse us, the audience, in the chaos and horror of war. Which might even work if 10, 15, 20 years of video games hadn't completely inured us to that. Hell, half the learning curve in those games involves blocking out everything on your screen except for the person you're shooting at. The Doom movie got laughed out of theaters for even trying this all the way back in 2005. And rightly so. But this is Bay we're dealing with here. A man more interested in machinery than any director who's not named James Cameron. He even recreates that follow a bomb from its launch to its target shot from Pearl Harbor, just to underline where his interests truly lie. Eventually, one of our heroes says, "This isn't over until we're all dead or they are." And I hear the voice of Colonel Kurtz from Apocalypse Now. Drop the bomb. Exterminate them all. The voice of absolute control, croaking out death with its last gasp. Credit where it's due. The surreality of war is well handled. Until, of course, one of our heroes has to ruin it by going, "Wow, this is so surreal." Gee, thanks. Hadn't noticed. And here at last, Bay uses his R rating for its God-given purpose. No bullshit necrophilia jokes this time around. Oh no, we're in a war zone. So it's nice to see people occasionally get sawed in half by a 50 cal. John Krasinski and James Badgedale are convincing comrades in shit. And Krasinski's reaction to Badgedale's death is legitimately heartbreaking. The face Krasinski makes when Badgedale's body gets unceremoniously rolled off the roof he was camping on. That's what I'm talking about. That's acting. And it's played perfectly. I mean, look at that face. Actually, with the beard, he looks kind of like Shia LaBeouf. Of course, these days, Shia's going for the Matthew McConaughey look, so everything's pretty much out of order. As so often happens, actors with range are trapped playing characters with no depth. The fact that they're all based on real-life humans makes this even more egregious than usual. This, which could easily have been a new Apocalypse Now for a new generation, squandered what little potential it had through basic amateur filmmaking fuck-ups. A poor match of artist and subject matter. One of the poorest I've seen in quite a while, and I watch a lot of superhero movies. When the first trailers for this thing hit the internet, a poster on the Libyan blog Journal of the Revolution summed things up so well, I want to test this person for psychic powers. It seems like the whole movie boils down to the spoiled bickering of Americans as they grapple for power, using the murder of a good man to gain political leverage over one another. Not unlike Libyan politicians, then. Unquote. Assalamu alaikum, anonymous shit poster. You nailed it, sight unseen and from half a world away. It's almost like we humans have more in common than not, wherever we hail from, and whatever god we pray to. And that all the differences nationalism and religion are meant to nail into our heads are just so much superficial bullshit. But, of course, I could always just be part of the globalist conspiracy to give you nightmares with chemtrails and make your teeth visible to spy satellites with fluoride in the water. All I know is, Mike, I was gonna go easy on pain and gain. But then I saw this. So, no quarter given. And it's good to know that you don't expect any.